We have a sweet topic today. We are talking about donuts and the concept of doughnut economics. So, I guess ever since this mainstream capitalism and theories of the standard theories of economics were introduced, there were always people who looked at the shortcomings of these models because they were not addressing some key issues that were important and coming up with new ideas, new ways of thinking about the economy. One of these concepts is the concept of donut. And what it says, it tries to present a model in which there is an ideal range for human economic activity. So it says we are faced with two kinds of requirements or restrictions. On one hand, if you look inside this circle, these are the basic needs that all human beings, all human communities have. And they are also, if you look more carefully, these are the goals of 2015 Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, correct? Adequate food, health, education, peace and justice, absence of political violence. All of these are things that what we want to make sure all human societies meet the basic needs of these requirements. Enough food, enough water, enough energy. So economic activity, especially capitalist economic activity, can allow us to achieve economic growth, produce housing, produce food, many things. But then we face a limitation. What is that limit? That's the capacity of the planet Earth, correct? Because as we bring more and more people outside this circle, so that nobody faces a deficit of these requirements, then we have to face the fact that human economic activity creates some adverse consequences. It creates pollution. It creates waste. And of course, the more recent phenomenon, global warming, which is a direct result of human activity. That's when we overshoot. So economic activity in any society, on one hand, must be strong enough to meet the basic needs of the society for everyone, and that everyone is important. On the other hand, it should not be so excessive that it goes beyond the ecological ceiling. So we have social foundations and ecological ceiling, as we find here. And when you are staying between these two limits, it looks like a donut, and the donut is considered as safe and just space for humanity. So the idea of this economic model is to tell us how we might be able to go from the current economic systems to a donut economy. What is the current status of economic systems in the world? We have at the same time shortage of many of these. We have poverty. We have millions of people without access to water, safety, justice, and simultaneously we have pushed out of the boundaries with all kinds of pollutions and damage to the environment. Therefore, in two directions we need to come into the donut. On one hand, fair distribution, attention to the basic needs of all individuals. On the other hand, limiting or adjusting economic activity so that we do not overshoot into the boundary ecological ceiling of our planet, because it's a contained ecosystem, the planet Earth. So this is what we observe now. These red ones represent the shortages. So the founder of this idea, the economist who presented it, is Kate Raworth, a British economist. And these are measurements of to what extent we have moved out of the donut in both directions. For example, you can see here the shortage of peace and justice. Food is still some shortage because the red going inside the circle represents the amount of shortage. And then in terms of the damage to the environment, climate change already visible, and we are able to measure how much we have changed the climate. Nitrogen and phosphorus loadings, again excessive, it affects the environment. Land conservation, significant amount of damage to land, especially agricultural land. And of course, loss of biodiversity. Many species of plants and animals are at risk because of human activity. So this is what we are going to talk about. What is this current this idea of doughnut economy, and what are the proposals so that we can move towards this system. Okay? So this is a new way of thinking. Think about it. When you take a standard economic class, you don't start with these concepts. These are secondary. The primary focus is in full employment and economic growth, which has been the dominant economic system in the world, and the consequence is what we observe here. So there is something wrong, according to the author. There is something wrong with our planet's economic system. Okay, so what should we do? A number of recommendations or ways of thinking about it. First of all, we need to think about our objectives. What is it that we want to pursue, both at the individual level, but more important than that, at the collective level of societies when it comes to governance and policy making. Okay, so instead of focusing on GDP, let us focus on donut. And that means from the beginning, when we teach economics, when we teach social sciences, to children, high school, university, the way we teach about our social system should focus on making people aware of this donut and of the both inner boundaries and outer boundaries of this donut. Number two, look at the big picture. This is a familiar, this one here, this small graph here, is familiar to you if you have taken an introductory course. This is the circular economy that students learn in introductory courses. You have households that are consumers and providers of labor, and then you have businesses that engage in production. And you have this continuous flow of labor markets, financial markets, and markets for goods and businesses. Households buy from businesses, businesses buy labor and capital from the households who own the asset. But again, this ignores the boundaries of the environment and basic needs of society. Rather than looking at this circular flow, it is better to look at this one. And because this is so small, this is what it looks like at a larger scale. There is continuous circulation. There is circulation of financial exchanges, between markets, government buying, selling, employing, households offering labor, buying goods and products. There are communities who engage in communal activities, but there is other circulations. Interaction with environment. We receive living materials, energy from the environment, and our economic activity generates waste and heat. So we should also, when we look at the cost and benefit of economic activity, this continuous circulation, which allows all of us to survive, we should also be mindful of interaction with the environment and with others. The key other factor that is important because in this model of capitalist economy, we say every one of us, the only thing we need to care about is ourselves. But we saw in that big picture of the doughnut economy that one of the goals should be to make sure everybody can meet their basic needs according to the sustainable development goals that we have defined. So right away you can see that this is a prescription. Okay? So this is not like a study of economics in terms of just what is human behavior. It also says we have, it begins with an ethical position of what we should be doing. So the basis of doughnut economic analysis is if you accept those recommendations that the author presents. Any questions, comments so far? Very good. Okay, so then what are some more specific details we need to know about? So when we think about economy, we should think of it as an embedded economy. Economy that's embedded in a social system and an ecological system. That's why we call it an embedded economy right here. So living in an embedded economy calls for the design and development of economic policies that prioritize values other than accumulation of profit. It is challenging one of the main assumptions of neoclassical economics, which began with Adam Smith, which said, people, businesses pursue their self-interest. With regard to businesses, that means just focus on profit. Building on doughnut metaphor, embedded economy diagram is a dynamic model of a nest that nests the economy within society and the living world. Economic activity must be mindful of the living world and of all the people in the society. Because there is nothing inherent in capitalist system that every human being would be able to earn an income. Labor of individuals or even their assets are employed if given the technology of the economy, it could have a function, it could have a role in production. If your skills cannot play your role in production and nobody wants to employ that, you go without income. And this model says, regardless of the skill, every human being deserves to receive an opportunity to meet those basic goals. That's the interaction with society aspect. Diverse ways in which it can meet the people's needs and wants. Very good. Okay, so we talked about two of those already. The fact that you shouldn't focus on profit, and if you are thinking about circular economy, you should think of an embedded economy. What else? Human nature. We talk about, in economics, we talk about a rational economic man. continuously doing cost-benefit analysis of what is in my interest and what is the most efficient way of minimizing cost, maximizing profit to achieve my goal. That is the rational man. It says the alternative to that is the socially adaptable humans who think about me and us in a broad sense. One of the claims that this author makes, and it has been verified, is that students who take economics courses, standard micro-macro, it changes them. They somehow become less sensitive to empathy declines a little bit. They are more focused on self-interest, and they are willing to simply focus on personal interest more than students who have not taken economics at all. This has been empirically verified. In her videos, we're going to watch a little bit of that. She goes into details of that. So she's proposing that our values are influenced by the environment, by education, by what we learn from our community. Therefore, what we teach is important. If we keep saying humans are selfish, everybody is selfish, it increases the selfishness in our character. That's what she claims. So that's number 3. Number 4, do not just look at, when you study economics, don't just look at the mechanical equilibrium, which is what we all do. Economics, any level of economic analysis, from introductory course to economists who are working in banks, in Federal Reserve, in government offices, our primary tool of analysis is equilibrium analysis, interaction of supply and demand. But Raworth says we need to look at a complex economy which not only has this equilibrium, but it has interactions with as an embedded economy. Okay. So the example that she presents is this idea that you have, imagine you have a number of chickens that are living around a road. Okay, so chickens, what do chickens do? They lay eggs, and then eggs become chickens. So you have a positive circle that generates more chickens. But because they live next to a road and they are chickens, they try to cross the roads and they get killed. So on one hand you have regeneration, and on the other hand you have a mechanism that creates balance. So that this number of chickens is sort of balanced by the environment in which they are reproducing and living. I think she's trying to use this to explain that we need to focus on a dynamic equilibrium rather than just this static model of supply and demand. Okay, what else? Another teaching. Do not assume that economic systems will take care of inequality. Okay. So we have in economics in theory by Simon Kuznets that said economies, as an economy starts growing, inequality increases. You have initially a village economy, a small economy, communal economy. That economy becomes more complex, becomes a city economy, and then a country economy. The specialization, investment, and concentration of capital, which are good for economic growth, but they also create inequality. And we saw the best example of that was what happened in China from 1980 to 2015. Strong growth without a Gini coefficient, inequality. According to this theory of Doughnut, at some point when the economies keep growing and per capita income becomes larger and larger, if these countries are democratic or people have a mechanism for asserting themselves, then they will take steps to reduce inequality so that inequality reaches a peak during economic growth. The horizontal line shows per capita income and then diminishes. But we just read we had a week of lectures on inequality, and what this Thomas Piketty showed, he demonstrated that this inequality can continue, and he provided a mechanism, an explanation, and also some data, 130 years of data showing how inequality goes up and down, but does not necessarily decline. So Kate Raworth says, don't just ignore inequality and say economic growth will take care of it. We need to design an economic system which has some distributive elements in it by design. The system must automatically make sure that the inequality does not go beyond a certain level through efficient redistributive mechanisms. Another example. This one is a typo. Here you have environmental concerns. There is another curve, similar to Doughnut curve, which says that as economies develop, initially, because of rapid growth, you have worsening pollution, environmental pollution, and damage to the environment. But beyond some level, the society would reduce that. We've seen an example of that, even though he says we need to design it, but this is to some extent true because in the United States, does anybody know at what point environmental concerns became very important in the United States? 1970s. Before that, there was very little concern. But it was in 1970s that pollution in the cities and the environmental pollution, damage to environment became important. So you see the United States going through a long period of prosperity, economic growth, but then you have more educated people, more awareness, and social movements that start to worry about environment. And that led to all kinds of policies, the Environmental Protection Agency taking action. And today, the pollution in the cities is much lower than 1970s. In New York City, Boston, all kinds of regulations. We saw the same thing in China after 1915. The new priorities of President Xi were the same thing, saying that we are now going to move from quantitative growth to qualitative growth with attention to clean environment. And many old polluting technologies were moved from populated industrial regions of China either to other countries or to Eastern China. For example, coal plants were replaced with modern alternative plants for generating electricity, especially solar power, where China is now the leading generator of solar energy. Nevertheless, in Doughnut economic theory, we say that this does not necessarily happen by itself. And at the macro level, we see that it is true. Even when democratic countries take actions within their own borders, at the international level, every country is concerned about economic interest and pollution of the oceans, pollution of the air, global heating, demonstrates that we are not really taking care of environment automatically because we are more prosperous. Economic prosperity has continued, but it is difficult at the global level to confront the pollution and damage to the environment. So again, the recommendation is that the system, the economic system, should be regenerative by design. We must build mechanisms into the economic system that will automatically prevent pollution. Countries are investing in new technologies that can help improve the quality of environment, preserve the environment. True. What else? What about human activity in cities, day-to-day economic activity? Active recycling. You know, not every country invests heavily in recycling, for example. But Doughnut Economics says that should be built in. It also says pricing of commodities should take their environmental impact into account, so that from the beginning, when we buy any commodity, not only do we pay for its economic cost, but we also pay a little bit for its carbon footprint. That's the common, maybe all of you probably have heard the word carbon footprint. For example, when you fly, they ask you, would you like to pay a few dollars more to offset the carbon that you're going to release per passenger? She recommends that those mechanisms should be built in. And of course, you are going to see examples of how some cities are adopting these ideas to try to build in mechanisms to offset the externality, the negative externality of environmental damage in pricing of various activities. With respect to inequality, for example, one of the recommendations is that don't leave the wages to the labor market. Look into basic, for example, basic minimum needs and design the wages according to that. Then reach out to corporations through campaign, through government policy, to convince them that all workers deserve a basic, at least a basic minimum income to meet all of those social needs that are listed in the initial graph. Okay, so what do you mean with regenerative design? This is what it is. Compare this with how a theory says that gradually economies would try to clean up the environment as they become more prosperous. It says, look at two aspects of human economic activity, the biological aspect and the technological aspect. So, we generate a lot of waste. Minimize the amount of heat and also minimize the amount of lost matter, meaning the amount of material that we just dump as garbage, which is returned into the nature as garbage or pollutant. So take steps towards that. As much as possible, try to regenerate and capture value at each stage of decomposition. Decomposition means anything that we are not using anymore Over time in nature, that is going to decompose, correct? Any kind of waste. But try to capture as much of that, recover as much of anything that we can, rather than just dump it in the ground. On the technical side, instead of continuously throwing away something and buying a new one, as much as possible we can restore, repair, reuse, refurbish, and recycle, so that we use machinery, tools, more than as much as we can, rather than just throw away, buy a new, throw away, buy a new. Think about the way people use cars, generally. You use it for a few years, you sell it, and then in some societies, after a few years, the cars are completely out of commission and they cannot be used at all. We go back to the nature. So it says, try to recover as much of that as possible. Why we need to actively do that? Because empirical studies have shown that economic system automatically does not take care of these concerns. Therefore, we need active and conscious policies to take care of it. To give you a comparison, this is what happens to most products that we produce in the economy. And this is what she calls degenerative. We take materials from the nature, we make goods that we consume, we use them, and then we throw them away. And when you throw them away, a large amount of resources go to waste. And it adds to pollution. Think about landfills. In some areas, including Massachusetts, nearby landfills to cities like Boston have already been filled. Trash and waste has to be taken 2-3 hours away to further away landfills. On the other hand, with the regenerative model, as opposed to that which is considered degenerative, you take, you make, and then you regenerate what you have and restore as much as possible. But what do we do? Does our culture encourage this? Does the culture encourage reusing and recycling? On one hand, the producers continuously use advertisement to tell us that you need to buy a new thing. If you have something that is old, that means you are not hip, you are not part of the what can we call it? I don't know, people who are popular class, and you're not keeping up with the Joneses, continuously buy something new. Because that generates profit. If people use what they have, it does not generate profit. Many cell phones can work for years and years, but we, especially young people, feel compelled to buy the latest model that comes out. That becomes an issue. And then, for the middle class and the upper class people in society, using used products is considered below standards. So there is a pressure to always buy a new car, have something new, rather than recycle and use something for a longer period of time. And remember, profit is made through production. So durable goods, if you keep them for a long time, that means less profit is generated. As I said, these are all prescriptions, but I'll show you in a few minutes that some people around the world are taking these recommendations seriously. That's why we are reading about it. So again, in terms of distributions, she shows the society that focuses on just profit, profit, profit as being divisive. It creates the income divide, it creates all kinds of social divide. Therefore, in order to avoid that, she says it's better to go from a divisive system to a distributive system which allows for sharing opportunity and values with all who co-create it. Okay. So a mechanism so that anyone who is part of the economy would receive a fair share that allows them to live a minimum prosperous life. What is divisive? Current models of business, finance, and trade tend to concentrate value and opportunity in the hands of a few to the detriment of many. How would you provide an example for that? Is this value? Why does the United States have antitrust laws? Why do European countries have a similar institution called competition laws? Because when you create a well-functioning capitalist system, because people have different talents, different IQ, different levels of emotional intelligence, perfect competition is not sustainable. Most industries move towards oligopoly or monopoly. And the peak of that concentration of capital in the United States, for example, was last decade of 19th century and the first 2 decades of 20th century, with people like Rockefeller, Stanford, Carnegie. These were people who were able to, without breaking the law, of course they were doing it without getting caught, but primarily without breaking the law, just with being smart, working hard, borrowing, leveraging, gained considerable amount of wealth and monopoly power. So the society responds to that by antitrust laws, by saying this is too large, you cannot be monopolistic, regulation. That's when we maintain the system, and when we observe somebody going too much far away, we try to correct that. Doughnut Economics says, again, design an economic system that prevents too much of that. So how do we do that? How can you, do you want to stop a company like Tesla because you don't want concentration of wealth? That's not a wise thing to do. But you can take steps to have people being part of that. One recommendation she has is that a portion of the shares of any corporation be set aside for the workers. In other words, workers being able to share in the profits of the company. That way, when a company is successful, some part of that success is distributed to workers. What kind of workers? Workers who would be willing to work for Tesla at minimum wage, because ultimately all human beings have to work to make income. That's why the wages can sometimes go down below a sustainable wage, below what can sustain you. So that's one of the examples. But there are many other mechanisms that, for example, she recommends that at the board of directors of businesses should include community representatives or workers' representatives, so that they can also have a voice in key decisions of corporations. Of course, laissez-faire capitalism doesn't do that. There are other mechanisms, but that's what Doughnut Economics recommends. And with regard to growth, it says this idea of always focusing on growth is wrong. And this is what all governments do. Look around you. The measure of success for any president for re-election is economic growth. But that pushes the ecological boundary. We can achieve growth, but at the expense of all kinds of damage that we explain. So she recommends this kind of thinking. Yes, it's good to grow over time, but after some point, you can have prosperity and you can have people, she uses the word thriving, achieving a certain level of happiness and capabilities like the ones that Amartya Sen mentioned. So you can reach this level and you can be a prosperous society without continuously pushing up. You can just maintain the level of GDP, enjoy that. Because once you maintain this, you are able to contain the damage to the environment. You stay within the dome. So, some countries, some not countries, but some local governments have actually adopted the Doughnut Economics. This is an example of cities around the world. They have a website, just type Doughnut Economics, and you go to their website, and you can see their latest reports and latest activities. But here are some examples. Philadelphia, for example, was one of the 3 pilot cities of the thriving cities. This idea of Doughnut Economics has been primarily picked up by local economies, mostly in Europe. But some cities and places in United States and Latin America as well. For example, Portland, Oregon. Oregon is a relatively liberal state. Maybe some of you have visited. Portland has adopted this. In Europe, the city of Amsterdam was one of the first cities to adopt these ideas of Doughnut Economics. So you can see them here. Primarily, it's really a community action group, either to influence local policy or to encourage people to voluntarily, or corporations, to voluntarily change their behavior based on what was said. So let's look at Amsterdam in Netherlands. This is a place where you can enjoy secondary marijuana smoke very easily because everybody is smoking, and if you pass by them, and if you like to inhale, you can get significant amount of marijuana. Some of you might enjoy that, but I don't know. Anyways, I have been exposed to it even though I don't smoke. So, a very liberal city in Netherlands, and a number of actions in that city based on the idea of Doughnut Economics. One of them was the concept of true price initiative, where voluntarily many people were encouraged with their awareness to pay a little bit more for every product that they bought. In some stores, you would see 2 price options. One of them was with the environmental impact in order to offset the carbon footprint. During April 2020, during the first wave of COVID-19, the Amsterdam city government, of Amsterdam, officially announced that they are going to embrace some of the concepts of Doughnut Economics. And that encouraged many other cities to do something similar. What did they do? They announced that they are going to bring 872,000 residents inside the donut, ensuring that everyone has access to a good quality of life. That's the inner circle, the societal needs of the society, but without polluting the environment, without putting more pressure on the planet than is sustainable. Okay? Cities offer a good opportunity to prove that the donut can actually work. In 2019, C40, a network of 97 countries. So this is an idea that's actually being practiced. Focused on climate action, asked Raworth to create reports on 3 of its members, Amsterdam, Philadelphia, and Portland, to show that how far they were living from living inside the donut. In other words, they tried to conduct these studies to demonstrate how they were deviating from that ideal range, that donut in which they were supposed to live. Okay, this is not Kate Raworth, this is the Deputy Mayor of Sustainability in Amsterdam. Deputy Mayor for Sustainability. So she was the one who tried to promote these ideas. What did they do? At a city level, they drew up a circular strategy. Remember all of those regenerative circulations that we saw? They drew one of those to try to come up with practical ideas. One of them was reuse and recycle, correct? So they have come up with practical policies to reduce waste, reuse and recycle materials for consumer goods, building materials, and food, as much as possible. So here is an example of that. The Beach Island is an area that the Netherlands is reclaiming land. The Netherlands is famous for reclaiming land from the city because they have such a small amount of land, so they are continuously pushing into the sea. So when it comes to the development of these, what is known as Beach Island, they try to take all of these environmental and distributive issues into account. That's what this concept is, voluntarily and consciously trying to be mindful of the fact that we have an embedded economy in environment. We cannot ignore that we are part of a living planet. So in all stages of constructing this, developing this reclaimed island, which is in southeast corner of Amsterdam, they applied all kinds of regulations because it was under the purview of the city municipality, according to the concept of Doughnut Economics. One of them is this. For example, what were some examples? When they transported materials, they used boats that were using low-emission fuel. Now, a private transport company is focused on minimum cost of transportation in order to maximize profit. But they consciously specified what kind of boats we are going to use. Foundations were laid using processes that minimize the harm to the local wildlife while protecting citizens from rising sea levels. Again, taking all kinds of biodiversity issues into account. And here is some of the buildings that they were constructing. As I said, these islands are reclaimed. So in Amsterdam, you see even some floating houses in all of those canals inside Amsterdam. And here is an example. So construction of these was conducted in a way that met the environmental sustainability requirements. Here is another one. Take a look at this. What do we have here? Denim jeans. I'm sure you have heard this is a popular brand. In October 2020, textile suppliers, jeans brands, and other links in the denim supply chain signed the denim deal, agreeing to work together to produce 3 billion garments that included 20% recycled materials. Recycling material as much as possible, so that it won't just go into a landfill and is used again and again. Okay? So these ideas are being put into practice. Okay? And here is Kate Raworth herself. COVID-19 has the potential to massively accelerate the transformation. If governments use economic stimulus packages to favor industries that respect the sustainability principles. So Kate Raworth cites Milton Friedman. Who is Milton Friedman? He has passed away, of course. He is considered the father of capitalism, a strong advocate of free enterprise capitalism, very popular in 1970s, advocate of minimum government regulations, and a winner of Nobel Prize in economics, who famously said that when a crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. So whenever there is a crisis, ideas that have already been presented but have not received notice might suddenly become popular. So Kate Raworth says, I'm presenting this Doughnut Economics. Right now, it's just a few cities that are paying attention. But who knows, maybe there is another crisis, environmental crisis, and then suddenly the entire world will take notice, because it is a concept that will gain popularity. When you frame something, I mean, there's nothing new about these ideas of environmental sustainability and inequality. But when you give it a name, sort of an attractive name like the Doughnut Economics, first of all, everybody wonders, what is it? That's how I found it. I came across the title, Doughnut Economy, and I wanted to know what it is. So it catches the attention of the world, and she claims that we're having it ready so that, at least in the future, who knows, it might go beyond just the crimes. Now, Doughnut Economics is one of many theories that are presented as alternatives to current capitalism. Another one, which is also very conscious of fair distribution and environmental concerns, is something called foundational economics. We're not going to go into it, but if you look at their website, you find really very interesting material. Perhaps this could be a topic of one of your essays for another class, then you can learn about it. I just want you to be aware that these ideas exist. So what is the emphasis in foundational economics? They say we need to pay attention to economic activities that are essential for human survival. What are they? Material infrastructures. This is our priority. Water, food, energy, sewer system. A well-functioning set of welfare services such as health, education, and elderly care. So they argue that we should consciously, as citizens, demand that government primarily focus on these. rather than just allow the forces of market to allocate resources. These must be taken care of first so that we can survive and thrive. And then on top of that, so if you like to expand entertainment, the casinos, tourism, that's the dessert. But this is the essential for survival. Foundational economy refers to these as basic requirements of life for all citizens irrespective of income. So all of us, regardless of income, need that infrastructure. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. You need to live in a city that has a good water delivery system, sewage system, electricity, basic infrastructure. And they have an interesting initial article that they presented this idea. There were several economists called Manifesto for the Foundational Economy. Most of these economists are Europeans, and they have conferences, 2 or 3 conferences around the world. So there are also all of these are what we call fringe economic ideologies. They're not mainstream, and they are not able to compete with the standard economics, but they do exist. So you should be aware that they exist. Okay, there are some other materials about specific business policies. I won't go into those because I would like to go actually to show you a video. So this is really an interesting video where let's copy the link if we are successful. And watch this video. So Kate Raworth uses very simple tools to explain the concepts.
Welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be doing this session together with you. As you can see, I'm sitting against a black background. I'm going to be giving a quick introduction to the core concepts of Doughnut Economics, and I decided rather than show slides again, I wanted to do it in a more playful, festival style way, so I'm going to do it visually. So I'm going to give a quick overview of 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. Here we go. First of all, the first thing you do not need is one of these, because 21st century economics does not, I think, start with calculations, equations, and maths. That's not where we begin. We begin with our eyes, the way we see the world, the images and the models that we put in front of ourselves that deeply influence what we see and what we don't see, what we put at the center of our vision, what we leave at the periphery, or what we leave off the screen altogether. So, I'm going to tell you the story of 7 ways to think in images. The first way to think like a 21st century economist is to change the goal. To let go of the 20th century goal of the shape of progress being endless growth, this exponential curve shape going, not just stopping up in the air, but going up, up, up through the ceiling endlessly, because that's what exponentials do. The 20th century concept was that we could measure economic success with GDP, gross national product, and this would be a good enough sign of an economy's success. No matter how rich an economy already is, the idea that its success lies in yet more growth, and you hear this in the speeches of politicians and the advice of economists, that the solution to our problems, even if we are sitting in the richest countries in the world, the solutions to our problems lies in yet more growth. There's something insane and ultimately impossible about that. So let's leave behind the pursuit of endless growth and replace it with thriving in balance. For this, a donut-shaped compass can accompany us, right? And the goal here is very simple. Leave no one in the hole, falling short on the essentials of life, but don't overshoot the limits of our life-supporting systems of our planetary climate. So we need to thrive between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. And this notion of thriving in balance, not endless growth, but thriving, of course, goes back in indigenous cultures a long way. It is at the heart of an indigenous worldview, living in balance with the rest of the living world. And if each one of us knows it in our own bodies, health lies in balance in the human body, can we take that to an understanding of health lying in balance in the planetary body, so that we have a donut-shaped picture that says, leave no one in the hole, falling short on these essentials of life, and these 12 dimensions of the social foundation: health, education, housing, food, income, peace, voice, equity. They come from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to be left in this hole. So leave no one in the hole. But as we seek to meet our needs and our wants, we risk collectively overshooting these 9 planetary boundaries that give us the unique stability of life on this planet, of a stable climate, fertile soils, abundant biodiversity, recharging fresh water, a protective ozone layer overhead. We'd be crazy to kick ourselves out of this thriving space of balance, but of course that is exactly what we are doing. So how do we turn our story around and start to come back within planetary boundaries while meeting the needs of all people at the same time? If you were teaching economics and wanting to turn that story around, what would be the first and biggest picture of the economy that you would teach? Well, the 20th century picture, and here we need the second way of thinking to see the big picture, because in the 20th century, the biggest picture of the economy that was taught focused on the circulation of money, the flow of money going round and round in the economy, and then goods and resources in exchange. Very clever diagram, quite useful for a war economy, but deeply flawed, because it ultimately presents the economy as if it's a piece of perpetual piping, plumbing that goes around and around. This is impossible, because what does it take to make resources go around and around? It takes energy. We need to put the recognition of the power of energy and life at the heart of our economies. No economy is a self-perpetuating machine. We need to think again. And so a new diagram for the biggest picture of the economy is called the embedded economy diagram. We start like this, recognizing that the economy is a subset of society. It is a social construct. We invented it and we can reinvent it. And it's embedded in social systems like political, legal, and cultural institutions. And human society is embedded in the rest of the living world. We are a part of nature and deeply dependent upon the web of life. We are bathed in a river of solar energy. There's the second law of thermodynamics, welcome to entropy. We draw in material and matter into the economy. We put out waste and pollution. And therefore, the first requirement of an economy that belongs on this planet is that it works with and within the cycles of the living world. It respects the conditions that create conditions conducive to life. But then let's look inside the economy and recognize, okay, there's the market, where most economics begins, and there's the state. And the 20th century economic debate got caught in an ideological boxing match between these two. Are you a free market, laissez-faire capitalist, or are you a state-loving socialist? And you've got to choose. In that ideological boxing match, economists lost sight of 2 other fundamental ways that we provision for our needs and wants. The household, where we all begin every day, with our families, as parents, as children, as partners, as carers, doing the cooking, washing, the cleaning, the sweeping, raising the next generation of kids, getting labour fresh and ready for work every day to go to work in the market or the state, all underpinned by unpaid caring work in the household. But also the commons, where we come together not through the market or the state, but as a community, collaborating, co-creating services and goods that we value, often with no money changing hands. So these 4 fundamental ways that we provision for our needs and wants, each bring you unique contributions, but no one of them should overwhelm or crowd out space for the rest. And then looking right inside, in the centre we have here financial flows. Just imagine if finance actually was a service. Financial services in service to the provisioning through these 4 means, in service to life, human well-being, and the thriving of the whole planet. That would be a very, very different financial system from the one we have today. So, a big picture that always recognises the economy in context and recognises our many needs of provisioning. These provide us big clues to how we can reinvent our economies. Third way to think, who are we? Humanity. How do we see ourselves in the economic story? Well, let's go back to Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and Dr. Milton Friedman. Economists over the centuries have created images of humanity, a model of man at the heart of economic theory, who's ended up being called rational economic man. He's always described in equations, in a set of attributes, but I think he deserves a portrait of his own. So, here he is. Rational economic man, he would be a man with no dependence. He stands alone, with money in his hand, that's the way he interacts with the world. He's got ego in his heart, self-interest. He's got a calculator in his head, and nature at his feet. He hates work, he loves luxury, and he knows the price of everything. And the real problem with this character is not just how absurdly narrow he is, it's what looking at him does to us. Because you see, the more that we are told that he is like us, we actually become like him. Studies have shown that economic students...
So he's criticizing the way economics is taught in Europe, in the United States, and how it might affect our perception.
From year 1 to year 2 to year 3, they more say they value self-interest over altruism. They more value competition over collaboration. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. We need a far richer portrait of humanity, of ourselves, if we're to thrive, 8 billion of us here together on this planet. And so instead, well, the model I need is simply us here. Community, in relation, the multitude of people and our relatedness. We are the most social of all mammals. We have an ability to share, cooperate, cue, gift, empathize, care, far beyond our next of kin, to cooperate and collaborate with those we've never met, just as we're doing in making this day happen. So we need to nurture the best of human nature and put that full pro-social richness of our character at the heart of our economic systems. The fourth way to think, like a 21st century economist, number 4, how do we think the economy actually works? Now, if we adopt the 20th century models and think of the economy in a rather mechanistic way, controlled, piping, enclosed, then we might come at it a bit like a mechanic, trying to make mechanical interventions to change the flow of things. This ain't going to work, because the economy is not controlled and utterly predictable, and does not work in a mechanistic way. The economy is a complex, adaptive system, and we can't control that. It's got feedback loops and tipping points and unpredictable behaviour that you don't know is going to happen. But what we can do is seek to understand it and seek to be good stewards of this system. Can we steward it and try to shape its dynamics so that they serve our goals? So if we can be stewards, more like gardeners than mechanics, what direction would we want to steward the economy in? And the fifth way is to create the economy to be distributed by design. Because we have inherited economies that are divisive by design. They capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few. Did you know that over the last decade, the number of billionaires in the world has more than doubled, from 1,000 billionaires to 2,000 billionaires? And the richest 1% of the people in the world own half of the world's wealth. There's absolutely no way that humanity can live and thrive in the donut in such an extraordinarily unequal world within and between nations. So we need to take this deeply divisive economy, divisive because of privilege, inheritance, regulation, power. We need to turn that divisive economy into one that is far more distributed by design, so that we share value and opportunity that's created with all who co-create it. And that turns out to be the whole of society.